Welcome to the Happy Soul Podcast. My name is Melissa, and this is Sammy. We are diving deep into conversations that connect and inspire. Stories of resilience, triumph, and transformation. Stories that take us to the heart of human connection. Please note that opinions of our guests do not necessarily reflect those of this podcast. Please listen with your kindness and an open mind. Each story shared is authentic and vulnerable. Let's embrace our differences with empathy, knowing every voice enriches us. Together, let's cultivate a community of respect and curiosity. Thank you for listening. Now sit back, relax, and prepare to be inspired.
Welcome to the Happy Soul Podcast, everybody. Today we are here with Heather Roy. Heather actually joined us for our Mother's Day mini-series as well, but we're welcoming her back today for our Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and we're so excited to dive deeper into this topic because there's so many pieces that Heather can add value to on this. To start off with, Heather works with a company called Radflex, which is providing videos for children undergoing radiation treatment. She also works with a company called Helping Families that is providing extra cost care for oncology families in the hospital, things like parking and other costs that will come up for them. And she's going to school for her master's in social work so she can make an even bigger impact in this world. It's incredible to hear some of the things that Heather is doing. But on top of that, she's also gone through her own struggle with the loss of her daughter, Evelyn, who passed away 4 years ago at the age of 11 and a half from cancer as well. And we want to chat as well about how the loss of her daughter, Evelyn, has fueled her to make such a bigger difference in these other companies that she's working for. And so we want to hear all about that and how all of that's making a big difference. So welcome to the podcast again, Heather. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you. It's fun to be back.
Great.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it.
Awesome. Glad you've been looking forward to it and not dreading it. That would be...
No, no dread.
So I think, obviously, we'd love to focus a lot on the impact that you're making, but let's go backwards to kind of a lot of where that started for you. I don't want to make assumptions here, but were you working with any companies or making any impact in the oncology world prior to Evelyn's diagnosis and the passing of Evelyn?
No, weirdly, I had like some minor involvements in, not through working with companies, but like I had heard like through a friend of a friend that there was a child here for oncology treatment. And we kind of rallied a bunch of friends and family together to make like hospital care packages and stuff that I delivered regularly to that family. And like I had run a couple of marathons raising money for cancer research, like I'd done like little things, but nothing in the capacity that like I am in now. And we had a friend two different friends actually who had childhood cancer. And so I had like some awareness of what it was to be in that position, but really, like, aside from just supporting people because we had a relationship with them, I wasn't overly engaged in the community.
Okay, so it was after Evelyn's diagnosis that kind of fueled that further for you then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So let's jump back and talk about Evelyn then. Can we jump all the way back to signs and symptoms of Evelyn that kind of led to going into the hospital and having a cancer diagnosis?
Yeah, with Ev, we really didn't have any warning signs prior to, outside of like a couple of days notice. So Ev, like, she was 10. It was in September of 2018 when she was diagnosed. And she had just turned 10 at the beginning of August of that year. She had been seemingly exceptionally healthy. I mean, in the mid of August, just a week after she turned 10, she ran a 10K. She ran the Edmonton Marathon. Whoa. She ran 10K. She finished it in just over an hour. In the May at the Calgary Marathon, she ran the 5K with her uncle. She had been really what we thought was the picture of health. The week leading into her diagnosis, she had some challenges, just pain in her right side. And so, the first day that she complained, we were kind of like, oh, is it just like like probably a kidney infection or, UTI, bladder, like one of those kind of things. And so it was like, let's give her some cranberry juice. And then the next day she was still complaining. And the day after that, she was complaining and sort of had like a loss of appetite. And my parents had actually been here that week visiting. My mom even was like, that's probably just like a little UTI and she'll be fine. Like, we're not gonna, like, don't stress. And I wasn't stressing and my mom wasn't, like, nobody was really particularly worried about it, but she wasn't a complainer. And so after 4 days of complaining and this kind of sudden loss of appetite over about a 24-hour period, I just thought, I wonder if it's appendicitis, because it was in her right side, this pain. And I was like, I wonder if it's appendicitis. And I've been ignoring it for 4 days. And then she's going to have like this really bad appendicitis and she's gonna have to be rushed into surgery. Like, I started to get a little paranoid. And so the girls had actually been with a friend of mine that Friday. It was a Friday. That Friday morning, I'd started a new job that day. And so I had gone in and was meeting with my kids and my families that I was going to be working with. And my girlfriend had texted me and said, I think your suspicion that something's up is right, because Ev does seem a little off. She looks a little bit pale to me. Her daughter, Brittany, was like an infant at the time. Ev would only put Brittany like on her left side. And anytime someone touched her right side, she was crying. Like, so Lisa was like, I don't know. I think you're right. I think something's going on. So when I finished work that day at lunchtime, I went to Lisa's place and we kind of chatted about it and made the decision that I was like, yeah, I'm going to take her in. And I had looked on like the AHS app to see the wait times. And weirdly, the wait time at the children's was only 42 minutes. And I was like, when does that happen? And so I was like, well, I'm just going to go to the children's rather than urgent care. The wait time is shorter. We're closer to there, etc. So we went in and I had Harper with me, and I put Harper in Emily's backyard, which is that like kids play area, and they can be there for, I think it's like 45 minutes or an hour or something. So I dropped Harper, I checked Evan through the ER. We were back in a room almost right away because there was no wait time. And so I took Harper over to Emily's backyard and then scooted back over to Ev. And like, she was just kind of watching a show, sort of napping, hanging out, nothing fussy. And the doctor came in the room and checked her and just was like, I don't think this is appendicitis, but I'm not comfortable with how much pain she's in. And so I think we should do an ultrasound just to get a sight of what's going on in there. And in that process, I called Mike to come pick up Harper because I thought, well, this is going to be more than 45 minutes and she's only going to tolerate being in this room for so long. So Mike had left work and came and picked up Harper. And Ev went in and had her ultrasound. And Mike hadn't even made it home yet. And the doctor was in the room after Ev's ultrasound, asking me if we could call him back. So Ev was in the ultrasound, and I remember saying to the tech, I feel kind of silly being here. Like, this can't be that bad, sort of thing. And as we were leaving, the ultrasound tech was like, you made the right choice bringing her in, Mom. And I walked back down that hallway feeling like completely vindicated. I was like, it is appendicitis. And so I thought I was going to get back in the room. The doctor would come in and be like, oh yeah, we need to remove her appendix, and it would be a day. And that was it. Right. And then, so the doctor said, can we call your husband in? And I was like, well, I mean, we can, but you need to tell me why. And like, for us, because Harper was a medical kiddo and had like procedures and some different surgeries and things happen already, I really was like, I don't need Mike to sit here and hold my hand through an appendectomy. And so and the doctor wouldn't have known that, but I was like, I'm not going to call him back here, disrupt our whole life just for this. So I said to him, you need to tell me why. And he said, well, there's a large mass, and like tears just immediately started falling, because you immediately think cancer. And he said, we need to run some further tests and we need to figure out what this is. And it would be good if your husband was here. So he said he would stay with Evelyn and I could go and make the calls I needed to make. And so I left the room. And I always tell people this part of the story because it feels like out of a movie. So it's like a busy ER and there's people in the hallway and there's all this stuff going on. And I don't want to like give Mike this news in front of, a hallway of strangers. And so I go in the bathroom and I close the door and lock it. And I call him and he answers and hey, Mrs., what's going on? And I was like, and then nothing left my mouth. Like I couldn't talk. And he was like, you're scaring me. You need to speak. And I said, there's a mass. And it echoed. And it was almost like I was telling myself, like it was settling in almost in that like echo chamber of a bathroom. And so Mike immediately was like, okay, I'm on my way. And then suddenly like your mom mode kicks in and I'm like, okay, wait, no, like we have to figure Harper out. Harper can't be here for this. Like it's a whole thing. So I called my best friend who had already known that we were like at the ER because, an hour earlier I had texted her and I was like, ooh, we're at the ER. Life sucks. Little did I know. And so I called her and again, like just to say it was just impossible to say, and finally, the words come out and I tell her and she's like, I'm turning around. I'm on my way. And I was like, no, I need you to get Harper. I need you to get Harper and be able to just keep her, I don't know, for some time because Mike has to come to the hospital. And so she went to our house and helped Mike kind of pack bags for Harper and for me and Ev, because I was assuming at that point we were going to get admitted. And she took Harper for the weekend and then Mike came to the hospital. By the time Mike got to the hospital, Ev had had a CT scan done. By the time I got back to the room after making those calls, and like I called my mom and dad and stuff, they were driving home from Calgary. They were like 7 hours down the road at that point. And so, kind of your like inner circle emergency people we sort of reached out to immediately and we're like, hey, this thing is going on, and we're totally freaked out. And I got back to the room. I mean, I was probably only gone minutes. It felt like hours because time just is like, I don't know, it's all weird in that time. It moves really fast and it moves really slow. And it just doesn't feel normal. I get back in the room and there was like a child life specialist, a social worker, and an oncologist all waiting for me. And you're just like, you just know. So they wanted to do the CT scan. So we did the CT. By the time the CT was done, Mike was there. And the oncologist was like waiting, basically. Like they stood watching it happen. They were in the room, like reading it as it was happening. And so there's like no gap of time. Like, sometimes you take your kids and they get an x-ray for a broken arm and it's like 45 minutes later, the doctor comes and is like, yeah, their arm is broken. This was like minutes of time in between. Like they were moving fast. Like you could feel the urgency and the seriousness in it. So they took us down to like this dark, quiet room at the end of the hallway. And that's when like from movies and stuff, that when they take you to the quiet room separated from everybody, that it's not good news. And so I just remember this like pit in my stomach walking down the hallway, and the doctor sat us down and he said, there's a large mass. It's 11 by 13 centimeters. And we're pretty sure it's cancer. And then he like pulls it up on a screen and like shows us this CT scan of her abdomen. And like, I'm not a doctor. I don't know what the inside of the body is supposed to look like. And I was like, where is it, that thing there? And he goes, well, it's this thing here. And he like does this big circle, and you're just like, so in Ev's case, there's like this huge mass, and it like pushed her, like all of her organs out of the way. Like her intestines were all pushed to one side. Like, when you're pregnant and all your organs move around, it was like that. Like her liver was way up in her rib cage and her kidney was down in her pelvis. Like everything just moved. And to like this mass to be there. And so basically from there, they admitted us mostly to manage her pain because she was really in a lot of pain at that point. Like now we know why, because it has like reorganized her insides and it was like pushing a lot. So what we think happened was it was creating so much pressure on the liver and the kidney that's why she started having pain, because it had pushed them so far out of where they belong. So they admitted us, and then the next morning, the oncologist that was on call, that was working in the unit that weekend, came in and was like, we actually are, now that we've had more eyes on it, blah, blah, blah. And was like, I don't know that it's actually cancer. I think it might be something called the benign hemangioma, which is like a large cluster of blood vessels. And he's like, we can surgically remove that. It's very vascular, so we'll have to, be careful, but it's not like a really risky surgery and Stephanie's like, but we'll need to do an MRI to confirm. And I was like, okay, so when is the MRI? Thinking like he's going to say like in an hour or something. He's like, well, it's the long weekend. And so, we're not fully staffed and nobody works in that part of diagnostic imaging on long weekends. And I was like, okay, so what are we talking about? And he's like, well, probably like Tuesday or Wednesday. And I mean, it's Saturday. And I'm thinking, no. And he goes, unless there's an emergency, we really can't, we can't justify it. And because we're not sure that this is cancer now, it's not an emergency. And I remember being like, well, is my mental health an emergency? Because, right, like, can I imagine 5 days waiting for that? So we just kind of were like, we knew that an MRI needed to happen sooner. And so we had gone back to the room and just were like, I'm like, my husband and I both just prayed where we're like, please, like, I need an MRI in the next 24 hours. And 5 minutes later, one of the nurses came in the room and was like, you have the MRI at 8:10 tomorrow morning. And we were just like, okay, we're going to be okay. Like, somebody's looking out for us. Somebody's watching out for us. It's going to be okay. And we were in like such a weird place at that point because, we had been told this is cancer. And then like minutes later, it felt like minutes later, it's like 12 hours later, maybe it's not cancer. And so you're just in this like weird place. I remember saying to the doctor, like, last night they were very sure that this was cancer. Like it was such like a upside down, like upheaval of emotions in that time, because you feel this sense of relief, but you're also still holding this sense of dread because like we really didn't know what to believe or do, and you're just in shock. So we were still admitted to the hospital, but we went home on a pass. And then the next morning we went back for this MRI. And so the MRI happens, and again, within a very short span of time after the MRI, the oncologist and a nurse and the fellow that was on service came in. We were in this like happy little room on the unit called the Sunshine Room, and we were about to start playing Settlers of Catan, and I saw them come to the door and sort of like pause. And I knew when I saw the pause that it was not going to be good news. And so they came in, the nurse, introduced herself to Ev and was going to sit and hang out with her, and they were going to take Mike and I to talk to us. So again, you're just like, if it was good news, they would give it to us right in front of her, right? So we go down the hallway to a dark, quiet room, and they basically said that it was cancer. And they were thinking at that point that it was either liver or kidney, because it looked like the mass was growing out of either the liver or the kidney. So they were going to need to do a biopsy and some more testing and some different things to kind of determine what was going on. That was all booked for the Wednesday, because at that point, like, basically they said, like, if it's cancer, we know it's cancer. We now need to know what type of cancer it is to create a treatment plan. But like waiting a couple of days isn't going to change the cancer at that point, right? Like, and Ev really didn't want to miss the first day of school. So they booked it on the Wednesday instead of the Tuesday, because they wanted her to be able to have that first day back at school after the summer. And I remember just feeling like sick sending her to school that day, because Like, I didn't know, was that going to be the only day she went to school? Was that like, you just have no idea, right? And like at that point, then we knew she was sick. And so you want to just like envelop them and take care of them and just like, I don't helicopter parent the crap out of everything. And so off the girls went to school. The next day I've had her biopsy, several other kinds of scans and tests and et cetera later. And we knew that it was not liver, kidney, but it was something called neuroblastoma. The biopsy MIBG scan showed multiple sites with tumors. So she had a mass in her pelvis, had a mass in her femur. She had lesions on her lungs. She had bone marrow presentation. Like, she had a lot of cancer in her body. So she was diagnosed as what is called stage 4 high-risk neuroblastoma. At the time when she was diagnosed, it was a less than 50% survival rate. They explained to us that it's like the kitchen sink of treatments because neuroblastoma is really aggressive. And so they basically hit it with everything repeatedly to try to get ahead of it and try to kill it off. And so she had surgery right away to remove the mass. So in some cases with neuroblastoma, they'll do a few rounds of chemotherapy, induction chemo, and then they'll have surgery, and then they'll have the rest of their induction chemo, and then the remainder of their treatment. In some cases, they'll do surgery first. We chose to do surgery first because the mass was causing so much pain, and we wanted to at least remove that discomfort for her. And our oncologist, it's a weird thing because like the parents get to make this decision, which is like, I know nothing. Don't let me make this decision. But between the surgeon and the oncologist and talking with them and sort of making decisions and plans, we just felt like surgery was the best. And our oncologist was quite supportive of that decision as well. So was the surgeon, and the surgeon, he is a well-known surgeon, but he also has a subspecialty in neuroblastoma. So, we knew we had the dream team out of the Alberta Children's Hospital, like literally the best. And we have friends who are doctors and stuff in that hospital. And immediately we're like, who's your doctor? Okay, you're in good hands. Who's your surgeon? Okay, you're in really good hands. Who's the anesthetist? Oh, that's my favorite anesthetist. Like, we knew we just had dream team going into it. And so we felt, because they felt good about the decision, we felt good about the decision. And so we had surgery first, and then I've had 2 weeks of recovery. And then right after what is Thanksgiving, so we're now like 6 weeks into this, she started chemotherapy. So she had 6 rounds of what's called induction chemo. And then following that, she had 2 high dose chemo with stem cell transplants. She was her own donor, which is a very cool thing. In certain types of cancer, like solid mass tumors, you can be your own donor. And the reason being is because the cancer is not originating in the blood. So if you have something like leukemia, you need a donor, like a stem cell donor, and they need to have like all these things to like match and stuff. And there's like a lot of like awfulness that comes with that, because you can reject the cells and you can develop things called like graft versus host disease, which can cause a lot of complications. It can cause death. Like, it's, if you don't get a good match, it can create way more complications than you started with. So when you can be your own donor, you remove all of those complications, right? Because your body's not going to reject your own cells. So it's cool. You go through this whole thing called an apheresis, and they take your blood out, and it like spins super, super, super fast, and it all separates the different components of the blood. And they take the stem cells and they get the cancer out of them and stuff. And they like cryogenically freeze them. They make them like, it's some ridiculous, like minus 65 degrees or something. I can't remember, but it's very, very, very cold. And they store them until it's time for your transplant. So the high dose chemo is very scary. And we almost lost Ev at one point during her high dose chemo from an E. coli infection that she developed. It's like high dose chemo is awful, but they have to basically kill you to make you better. And you sign paperwork that says that, like the paperwork says not conducive to life. And like, that it's going to be scary, but also, that if you don't do it, they're definitely going to die. And if you do it, they maybe won't die. So you make the choice of maybe not die, to hope that they get better. So she had 2 of those back to back. So that was almost 3 months straight in hospitals. Now we're like into May, and then she followed that with radiation treatment. So she had radiation, which brought us into July. And then after radiation, she had repeats of scans, and every couple of months they repeat scans. And in the July, they said that was the first time that she was no evidence of disease post a treatment. And so we were very, very hopeful at that point. So prior to that, any of the scans they had done, there was still disease, and she had what they call like not an optimal response to treatment. And so that summer we actually were like, wow, okay, we might come out the other side of this, everybody intact, and Ev was doing really good, and her platelets and her hemoglobin were really low, so it took a little bit before we could start her next phase of treatment. So her next phase of treatment was supposed to be 6 rounds of immunotherapy, but because she hadn't had optimal response in the previous phases of treatment, they switched her protocol to be 17 rounds of immunotherapy with chemotherapy connected to it. So that was going to add about a year and a bit onto our treatment plan. But again, they were like, this is our best chance, right, of coming out of this with no cancer. So we started that treatment with only the immunotherapy because her bone marrow wasn't recovering properly, and they couldn't risk giving her the chemo. So we had a couple of rounds of just immunotherapy before they started adding the chemo back in. And by the December, we had a confirmed relapse. So that means she had new tumors developed during treatment. And with neuroblastoma, there's currently no cure for a relapse. And relapse during treatment is like a worst case scenario for really any kind of cancer. Because it means your cancer is just so aggressive that like nothing is working really. So we held out in hope, and stepped out in joy, and we're like, we're gonna live really big. We were already living big, but we're like, we're just gonna live super big. We're gonna find, there's experimental options out there. We're gonna find the one that works the best, and we're gonna save her life with it. Our best option was something called MIBG therapy, which is high dose radiation by vein. MIBG is only offered in Canada in Toronto at Sick Kids Hospital. We got approved to go there, and we flew out in the February. I've had to have all sorts of tests and scans and everything done prior to. Everything looked good to go. We got to Toronto on a Wednesday. On the Thursday, she went to the clinic at Sick Kids, had scans redone, everything checked. Yep, we're good to go. We'll see you Monday, sort of thing. So we went in on the Monday to check in to start treatment. Like MIBG was starting the next day, and her oxygen was low, and they didn't know why, and her platelets were really low, and they didn't know why. And so they did a bunch of scans, and she had several new tumors develop over the course of the weekend. None of them were there or visible in scans on the Thursday. And the one was really aggressive and really bad. And she passed away that Wednesday afternoon. So cancer is a son of a bitch, and it is very aggressive and very awful. And so unfortunately on February 26th of 2020, I've passed away at 11 and a half years old after almost exactly 18 months of treatment. I don't think I ever get that sentence out without some level of emotion. because I don't think you're ever the same after that. Her funeral was March 14th. March 15th was the day they shut the world down for COVID. So it was like just an insane time. And we had been in Toronto. So like Mike and Harper flew out, our parents and some other family, my best friend and her husband, they all literally caught like red eyes to get there in time to say goodbye. My parents stayed for a couple of days to just kind of like help us with Harper, because you still have to make all these decisions. Like you have to get a body back and you have to like do all these things. And like, we didn't want Harper to have to be a part of all of that. And like, we were just zombies, right? Like you're just barely alive yourself. I always tell people like the state of shock you're in is so physical. Like it's not just emotional, it's very physical. There was a blizzard and we got back to Ronald McDonald House several hours after Ev passed away. We got back to Ronald McDonald House and it's a blizzard and they have this like star in the yard that they will light for your child and it stays lit the whole time you're there. And they asked us, did we want to light the star or did we want them to light it for us? And my husband Mike wanted to light it. So we stepped out in the yard to light it and he asked them to take a picture of us. And like, God bless that man. He never asked for anything. He's like so calm and even keeled and like so many good things. And he asked for a picture. And I remember thinking like, why do you want a picture at this moment? But because he like never asked for anything, I was like, okay. And I look back at that picture and not only do I just see this like physical like pallor on us, but I'm in capri pants and sandals. And like, I don't remember feeling cold. And like, we walked from the hospital back to Ronald McDonald House. Like, it's not a huge walk, but it's still like, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. And I don't remember feeling cold. And I look back at that picture and I'm like, that is such a representation of like how grief is like such an embodiment of all the cells of a human being. So we had to like make all these hard decisions and do all these things. And we got home and we had our funeral and then COVID. Like it just was a wild time. And COVID like really just amplified so much of what we went through.
Yeah.
So it just, yeah. So that's, I guess like that, I read this thing the other day that was like, with ADHD, there's no such thing as long story short. It's long story long. And I'm going to give you a million like unnecessary details in between. And I realize now I've just probably gone on for like half an hour and neither of you said anything. So yeah.
No, I think, I don't know. Is it cathartic for you to share that story or is it, would you prefer not to share that story?
No, it's good to share that story because I think like, especially as we're going into something like this is coming out in Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And I think like a lot of times the parts of childhood cancer that people see represented in the media and in other spaces are these like adorable bald-headed kids. And I think people are just so unaware of like all the facets of what this is, like the months of worry, the months of wonder, the physical and emotional impact it has on an entire community. Like this is not just Evelyn. And granted, she's like at the center of that circle and she's the one who is going through the worst of it. But like the amount of sleep I lost and the like long-term health deficits I have associated to it. And like, I mean, the divorce rate after something like this is like something like 60%. Like the fact that our marriage has survived all of this makes me so proud of our marriage. Like, I look at what Harper as like this lovely supportive sibling now lives with PTSD and anxiety and like all the like deficits in her life because of it. And I think like people just don't see that side of it. And so, while it's hard to share and it's like very intimate and very personal, there are pieces I always keep very close to my chest that I don't share, because they're pieces like that are right now just for us, maybe one day, but for now they're ours. But there are like really hard, like dig in the trenches, difficult pieces of this that is not expressed or portrayed. And like beyond the grief part, like the grief is the worst, because like the ultimate goal always is to heal, right? And what happens when they don't get better? Like that's the reality for more than 50% of stage 4 high-risk neuroblastoma patients. If you're MYC amplified, it's a less than 10% survival rate. The number of families we know who have lost children, who have children who are in relapse. We have very good friends of ours. Their son has had cancer since he was 6 months old. He is 6 and he is still in treatment. These are the things we don't see. And these are the things we have to talk about. And they make us uncomfortable, right? But maybe we have to be uncomfortable in order to make change. The government currently in Canada, the average, that percentage right now of the government's dollars that goes to childhood cancer research is 7%. It's a little bit high because there was a special grant that was given for research last year. But that number will drop down again in 2025. And so the average is actually 4% in Canada. So 4% of the government's research dollars for cancer go to pediatric cancer. All the rest goes to like, I mean, they give, and I'm a dog mom and I love my dogs and they are like my children. But they give dogs more than they give kids. And like, that's wrong. And in the States, it's 3.8%. So it's only marginally, we're only marginally better than the US, but this is like a global problem. This isn't just even a North American problem. This is a global problem that childhood cancer is really grossly underfunded, and it is a tragedy and it is a travesty and it needs to be better. And I really like, as hard and uncomfortable it is to share some of these like really ugly, awful, hard parts of our story. I think that no change is ever going to happen as long as we continue to see only adorable, smiling children. Like, I think those parts are important. And I'm so glad that I have thousands of smiling, happy, beautiful pictures of Evelyn, because we really did live big and live with joy during that time. And I want people to see that part of it. But I also think that's in some capacity, that's what hinders some of the change too, is that it's very hard to share the like dark, ugly parts. And if you aren't sharing those things, I don't think change is going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that story with us, Heather. Like, it's the amount of times I like was very close to crying in that story was very high. Because like just so many ups and downs. I mean, because you lost your daughter, but because there's so many ups and downs in that story, and so many, like, there's hope and it's gone, and there's hope and it's gone, and like, just, it's unreal to try to fathom what your family went through in that time.
Well, and like childhood cancer treatments, because it is so grossly underfunded, there's very few chemotherapies that have been developed specifically for pediatrics. So most of the time, what kids are receiving for chemotherapy has been developed for an adult body. And because of that, and then they cater the dose and stuff as best they can. But because of that, children have lifelong deficits because of their treatment. So, I mean, it's almost guaranteed infertility. A lot of kids develop something called like neuropathy. So it's like you see that it's like a foot drop. So Ev would walk and it would be like one foot would just kind of like slap the ground and the other would walk normal. That's a really common thing to see after certain types of chemotherapy. A lot of kids suffer hearing loss. A lot of kids have neurological deficits. I mean, you talk about the long-term effects of like anxiety, trauma, stress on the body. Those all have impacts on those kids. Like, I mean, and that's just a few of the side effects that these kids experience. So, I mean, the number of kids we know who grow up and wind up like losing a kidney because the radiation they received was so close to other organs that those organs kind of slowly die. Like it's so much. And I think like there's this real lack of awareness that these are things that are happening inside of this, and like our kids deserve better, right? I mean, the hashtag is more than 4. If kids deserve more than 4, like it's always something around that because the 4% is what they're talking about, and like they really do though, and these kids deserve more than 4, but their families and their communities and their friends all deserve more than 4 too. Like there's so much inside of all of this that just needs to be better. And like, I mean, the ultimate goal always is like for a cure. And we're not going to ever find a cure if we don't fund research. Mm-hmm. And then inside of that, our family has chosen as well to focus a lot on improving the emotional or like the psychosocial experience. And because it's hard to be in the hospital and it's hard to go through some of these treatments, and it adds layers of complexity to it that again have long-term deficits to children and their families. And so we've chosen to say, okay, like I'm not a cancer researcher. I'm not the one who's going to find the cure. I'm going to help fund it. And at the same time, I know a lot about making things better. And I know with, doing the degree that I'm doing, my master's in social work, I have a background in behavioral sciences. I was a special needs teacher for years and years and years. Like I have a lot of experience in that sort of like, how do you make days happier and brighter and better? And arguably I have professional experience in that as well as personal lived experience. And so like as a family, we sort of looked and said, okay, like we're not the ones that are curing cancer. We're going to help fund it. We're not going to cure it. And so what can we focus on? Like, what's the thing we can do that's going to have a tangible impact right now? And for us, that was like, we're going to focus on that psychosocial side because that's a thing that I can do that's going to change and it's going to make better. And a lot of that is really like grown out of things that Evelyn talked about and wished for and wanted. And sometimes it was as simple as like, I wish they had this. It would be easier if they had that. And so now we're focused on making sure that other kids have this and that, right? Like we're just, yeah, again, just that idea of like making it better. And doing that as a way of like building a legacy for Evelyn. I often say like, my energy to parent her, and I probably said this in the last podcast because it's one of the things I think I say most often, but like my energy to parent her doesn't go away just because she's passed away. Love is an action as well as a feeling. And like as a parent, one of the ways you show how much you love your child is through action. And that takes energy, and that energy did not go away when Evelyn passed away. It's still there. And it has to go somewhere. So I channel it into these spaces of building a legacy for her. And this is how I parent her now. And I get to be the driver of her dreams. And I'm like very proud of it. I wish I didn't know it was a problem that needed to be solved, but I'm immensely proud of the fact that we recognized that and are choosing to do something good with it.
Yeah. And you should be. And you should be proud of that. I want to dive into asking you about how you are doing that. But are you open to us asking some questions about Evelyn's story, or would you?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, like, I know that we've heard that neuroblastoma is usually like a younger kid cancer that they found. Did they comment on that for you guys about her age and finding neuroblastoma at this age or anything like that? Was there anything that they said about that to you guys?
Yeah, so neuroblastoma is most often found in like toddlerhood. Once you reach about the age of 6, our doctor basically said it like this. Like if I went to Tom Baker, which is our adult cancer center here in Calgary, if I went to Tom Baker, I might find someone with neuroblastoma. Like it's not impossible, but really past the age of 6, it gets very uncommon. And past the age of like once you get into sort of double digits, it's really it's really almost unheard of. And so in Ev's case, the fact that she was 10, so she not only had what's classified as a rare cancer, but she had it at a very rare age to have it. Um, I've never really looked into it, like if the success rate of treatment is better, older or younger. There is cases of neuroblastoma where they literally come like out of the womb and it's found. Like there's like it literally like months old in infancy, they'll find a neuroblastoma tumor. But oftentimes those kids don't even require treatment. It just kind of goes away on its own.
What?
Yeah, it's like such a weird thing. So neuroblastoma grows out of like immature nerve cells, and it normally starts like in the adrenal gland. And I don't know what happens in that infancy where if they like they say in some cases, and like Ev might very well have been one of these kids where like she was maybe born with it. Like that's and we won't ever know. Like there's no way to actually know, but that is like a thing that sometimes what it is that yeah, they were born with it and it just kind of slowly, or it does nothing, like it just stays exactly the same, and then one day it just grows.
Yeah.
But which is probably more likely why they're finding it younger in toddlers, because if something like that is going to shift, I mean, I'm making a lot of assumption here for somebody who's not an oncologist, but I think if something's going to shift, it's probably going to happen younger rather than like 10 years later, right? Like you just look at the probability of life in general. So yeah, so to be double digits is really like not as common at all. So if you get diagnosed at 6 or diagnosed at 10, I don't know if there's like better survival rates or not. Like we were told the same numbers that the people who have 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds that we know with neuroblastoma. So I don't think there's higher or lower success based on age. It really comes out of like what stage they find it in. And unfortunately with neuroblastoma, it's often not found until it is at stage 4. Yeah.
Well, I mean, based on what you said for those, and I guess it was her third round of tumors growing, like that first one must have just like shot out of nowhere. And then,
Yeah.
because like when you said those other ones that grew over the weekend, like that's unreal.
Yeah. And like those are really like that's, I mean, at a point where the disease is just so aggressive that really you can't do anything. And those ones are really like they shocked even the doctors. Like that's not a normal thing to happen in the way it happened. Like it's just even the team in Calgary, when we talk with them now and they're like, I'll never forget that day because we left a week and a bit earlier. Not even, we left a week earlier. And when we were leaving the hospital, it was like, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. And everybody was like, see you in a couple of weeks. Like there was zero indication that what was about to happen was going to happen. Like Ev wasn't healthy. She had relapsed neuroblastoma. We knew we were like fighting against all odds for survival. But we were really hopeful and our team was hopeful that this was going to buy us at least time to get some different kinds of answers and to get access to other kinds of treatments. And like, at least we were getting time, but like to die a week later, this is not common. This is not like, it just, even in Toronto, the team there was just like baffled because she had literally just had scans. They wouldn't have let us go to Toronto if they were like, oh, in 6 days she's not going to be here anymore. Like they wouldn't have even we wouldn't have even been candidates for the treatment at that point, right? So that is not a common response, and it's very startling, and it's very hard for it to happen so fast and for it to happen not at home. I have like so many mixed feelings about it because I also think like The alternative could have been that she knew, and like, how do you explain to your 11-and-a-half-year-old you're going to die, and that she has to live like that for weeks or months? Like, I don't think it's ever easy to say goodbye to someone, especially somebody who is dying when it doesn't feel like it's their time or their turn. But I do sometimes feel a bit of comfort in the fact that, like, it did happen fast, and like, maybe that was easier. I don't know. There's me trying to verbally process still, like, what happened, right? Because also I would have taken even 5 more minutes with her if I could have had them. But if you have no quality of life, like, what is better? I don't think there's an answer to stuff like that.
Yeah.
Stay tuned for part 2.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. To help support the growth of this podcast, please feel free to leave us a review, follow us on socials, or recommend us to your friends. Your support honestly means the world to us. With love, Sammy and Melissa.